Croeso cynnes I bawb.
A very warm welcome to you all to the Senedd.
This afternoon. Elin Jones dwi, a dwi'n
I'm Elin Jones and I'm the Llywydd, the presiding officer of the Senedd, the Welsh Parliament, and it's wonderful to welcome you to this event to remember Srebrenica. And of course, we do remember 25 years since Srebrenica. We would have held an event of this kind to remember that event a year ago at the Senedd, but because of the COVID circumstances, we were forced not to hold the event at that time. As it happens, we can hold this hybrid event where some of us are here as panelists in the Senedd and others are watching via Zoom. So a very warm welcome to all of you who are watching us via Zoom. This is the first of these hybrid events that the Senedd is holding as we restart and reopen the building as a Senedd. So we're forging ahead in holding this new event in the hybrid format with some of us here in the Senedd and others of you watching via Zoom. I am joined by three panelists here. I will be passing you over to the chair, Abby Carter, who is co-chair of Remembering Srebrenica in Wales and founder and director of Forensic Resources Limited, which is a forensic consultancy located here in Cardiff. I'm also joined by the chair and founder of Remembering Srebrenica UK, Dr. Vakar Azmi. A very warm welcome to you too. And of course, I'm joined by Jane Hutt, the Minister for Social Justice, who is a minister in the Welsh Government, and best wishes to her as she starts her new role as a minister within the new government for Wales. So to begin, we're going to watch a video that was prepared originally for last year's event to remember Srebrenica, the 25th anniversary since of the genocide. And as we return to this event, it's 25 years plus one since then. So we will be watching the video first of all, before I will pass you over to Abby Carter. So the video.
In 1995, Europe was the scene of genocide. The bodies who lie here are the victims of the greatest atrocity on European soil since the Holocaust. More than 8,000 men and boys were hunted down, murdered and buried in mass graves. Their remains are still being found today. 25 years on, the survivors and eyewitnesses who speak of the genocide risk being unheard.
Srebrenica je bila jako lijep grad, mali grad, ali je bio pun života, To je bila jedna mala oaza. Čak je mirisala, svaka je kuća imala svoju terasu prepunu cvijeća. Po danas da sam ostala bez ikoga, bez oba dvoje djece, bez muža. Oprostite, suza mi je izdajica, nikad ne bi to uradila, ali suza... Mogu pričati o svemu, ali kad dođe do djece da pričam o djeci, zaista mi bude tada najteže.
Bosnia and Herzegovina, one of the world's great crossroads, a melting pot of cultures and identities. All eyes were on this country in 1984 as it hosted the Winter Olympic Games. Within 10 years, the world's eyes would be turned back on Bosnia, but for different reasons. On the ashes of the former Yugoslavia, leaders exploiting identity politics rose to power across the region. Ultra-nationalist forces planned to create a greater Serbia, filled only with ethnically pure Serbs. This meant Bosnian Muslims were cleansed from the land. Serb forces, the most powerful military in the region, swept across Bosnia. sending people fleeing from villages in the north and east to concentration camps and slaughtering thousands of others. This was a battle of empire expansion, portrayed as a battle of faith and ethnicity. By 1995, Bosnian Serb forces had taken nearly every village in eastern Bosnia and flushed them of Muslims. Srebrenica was one of only a few UN safe areas in the region, and tens of thousands of refugees poured in. On July 11th, Srebrenica fell. As he entered the town, General Ratko Mladic spoke to Serb cameras.
Evo nas 11. jula 1995. godine u srpskoj Srebrenici. Uoči još jednog velikog praznika srpskoga poklanjamo srpskom narodu ovaj grad i napokon došao je trenutak da se posle bune protiv Dahija Turcima osvetimo na ovom prostoru.
As the Serbs moved in, women and children gathered around the UN base at Potocari. But men and boys like Hassan were worried about how the Serbs would treat them and made for the woods.
In July 1995, I lost my father and my twin brother. I tried to escape from Srebrenica through the forests alongside with them, but unfortunately I am the only one who survived. It took me 6 days and 6 nights to reach Tuzla. It was a real suffering. I did not have anything to eat. I was being hunted like an animal.
The few hundred Dutch peacekeepers at the base, waiting for UN backup that never came, handed over their weapons and the men and the boys to the Serbs. For those men and the men who had tried to escape, this was the beginning of the single most horrific week of slaughter in recent history.
They promised that we would not be killed and that we would be treated according to all the Geneva Conventions.
The thousands of men and boys captured were then loaded onto trucks and taken to execution sites.
I noticed the rows and rows of dead bodies in front of me, and I don't know when I was shot. I just remember later that I was lying on my stomach, that I was shivering and trembling. One of the soldiers said to the other to check all the bodies, but he refused. He said they are already dead and left the place. I never could imagine that I could survive at that moment. I just waited to die because I lost so much blood. Someone was moving in front of me, and it was other survivor, and I asked him, "Are you alive? Are you alive?" He said, "Yes, yes. Come and untie me, please." We hid everywhere, in the streams, in the graveyards, in destroyed houses and forests, because Serb soldiers were patrolling. They collected the dead bodies and put them on the vehicles, and they took them to a mass grave. And it was a horrific scene at that moment for me.
Hassan Hassanovic, a survivor of the genocide, is one of the guides at the Memorial Centre just a few miles north of Srebrenica and home to the former UN peacekeeper base.
I survived to tell the story of Srebrenica genocide. It's very important that people know what happened in Srebrenica, that we educate young generations to make sure that similar thing does not happen ever again.
2010. godine sam ukopala oba dvoje djece i muža. Mog starijeg sina sam ukopala samo 2 koste od nogu, tako isto i od muža. Mali sin rekli su mi da je kompletno tijelo sam ne ima lijeve ruke, pola malog prsta.
25 years on, the survivors of Srebrenica are still fighting to have their voices heard. The strength of survivors in sharing their stories and fighting for justice inspires us to take action. Join us at Remembering Srebrenica and pledge this year to stand up to intolerance and hatred, to raise awareness of the Bosnian genocide, and to make every action matter.
I hope the short video that you have just seen offers some context to why the work of the charity Remembering Srebrenica is so important. And it's the context of the work in Wales that we will be discussing today. I will start by introducing the statements that we have received from representatives of the Welsh political parties.
Today, we remember the 8,000 innocent men and boys who were murdered just because of their faith in the Srebrenica genocide. Today, more than ever, we must work together to ensure we are not divided by nationalistic intolerance, but ensure that Wales is open, inclusive, and celebrates its diversity. I want to thank Remembering Srebrenica for their brilliant work organising events across the UK, bringing communities together to remember Srebrenica, so we all learn from survivors of the genocide and stand up against hatred.
Mae 6 blynedd ar hugain wedi pasio ers erchyllderau Srebrenica. This year marks the 26th anniversary of the massacre at Srebrenica. Just hearing the name takes us back to those dark days in July 1995 when over 8,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys were systematically murdered and buried in mass graves. The horror is unspeakable. More than 20,000 women, children and elderly people were expelled from the area in an act of ethnic cleansing. Today we remember those who lost their lives in Srebrenica and honour the survivors. This year's memorial theme is rebuilding lives. Though recounting the event in itself causes pain, it is through remembering and educating new generations about what happened that we help ensure that such an atrocity never happens again. We must not only explore what happened in Bosnia then, but also learn about the long-lasting impact of genocide on those who survived and for whom the rest of time is about somehow rebuilding. Srebrenica was a stark demonstration of what can happen when hatred, discrimination and evil are allowed to take hold. And we're reminded of the importance of standing together against that hatred and division in our own communities, wherever we are in the world, now more than ever before. The genocide committed in Srebrenica must never be forgotten. Mae Cymru yn cofio Srebrenica. Wales remembers Srebrenica.
On the 11th of July, we mark the 26th anniversary of a terrible event that has scarred the history of Europe. The Srebrenica genocide saw the Serbian army mercilessly kill more than 8,000 Muslim men and boys. It was an awful act which we must always remember, not just now, but for generations to come. Today we must be reminded that we've all got a part to play in ensuring that our societies, no matter where they might be in the world, are more tolerant of one another's views. We have to overcome the hate and the other things that seek to divide us in our communities. And one way that we can do that is by remembering the tragic events in Srebrenica in July 26 years ago. So I want to encourage you all to take a moment this year to reflect on that awful event, that scar in our history, the worst atrocity that Europe has seen since the 1940s. Let's together remember Srebrenica this year.
Would like to thank all parties and their representatives that took the time to make these statements and to be involved in this event, as we encourage and are grateful for cross-party understanding and support in the work that we do. I will now hand over to Dr. Wakar Azmi, the founder and chairman of Remembering Srebrenica UK, who will explain the necessity for and the reasons why the charity was set up.
Thank you, Abby. And could I thank the presiding officer for hosting this memorial event, to the minister and to all the political party leaders who gave messages. It is wonderful to see that Wales is remembering Srebrenica today. It's very moving for me, and I want to thank on behalf of all the survivors to everyone for remembering Srebrenica. In terms of why the charity was founded, simple reason, the genocide that happened on our doorstep. Bosnia is 2 hours flight away from UK, and the genocide took place in 1995, shook all of us, particularly people who are Muslims living in the UK, Muslims like me. It shook us to the core. We couldn't believe that in civilized Europe in 1995, that people were being murdered because of their faith, because of their identity, when we had said never again after the Holocaust. And the hatred that was promoted, and this was the worst form of anti-Muslim hatred on our continent. The hatred that was promoted could be seen by the views of Biljana Plasic, who was one of the leaders of the political party that carried out the genocide. She said that Muslims, in other words, her people, white people, the Serbs who are Orthodox Christians, the Croats who are Catholics, and Muslims are of the same ethnic group, of the same race. They have the same color, the European. And she said that Muslims, in other words, her people who accepted Islam 500 years ago, had deformed genes. And over the years, these genes degrade further, and that is why we can't negotiate with the Muslims. So the Muslims were really debased, and such kind of dehumanization allowed leaders to co-opt ordinary people to carry out the murders. In Srebrenica, which is a small town in Bosnia-Herzegovina, over 8,000 Muslim men and boys were murdered. But across Bosnia-Herzegovina, 100,000 people were killed. Between 20 to 50,000 women were raped simply because they were of particular faith and a particular identity. 2 million people were displaced, all because of the hatred that was promoted. And we see that hatred in our communities, in our country, globally. We're very blessed and very lucky that it's not that kind of hatred where it is causing violence at that level, but we see discrimination persisting, we do see hatred persisting, and we see leaders, political leaders, who are using such language of dehumanization across the world, leaders who are promoting division and hatred, and that is deeply worrying. And what we need to do is to ensure that we come together and play our part in tackling hatred, in rejecting hatred. And we need to teach our children to ensure that they reject hatred. And that is why Remembering Srebrenica charity, with its core aim of educating people, to bring people to remember so that we can come as a community to reject hatred, to honor those who were murdered innocently, that we teach young people in our schools to reject hatred and extremism in all its forms, and that we learn the lessons to ensure that we guard ourselves as well as our society. So these were the core aims and objectives, and I'm so grateful to David Melding and Professor Salim Kidwai, who are the founding fathers, as the word to use, founding fathers of Remembering Srebrenica Wales, and now, of course, to the co-chair, Abby Carter, who has joined Professor Salim Kidwai and has been chairing brilliantly. Abby has been working so hard, extremely hard across whole of Wales with Professor Salim Kidwai to ensure that the lessons of Srebrenica are embedded. And I'm grateful to Abby, to Professor Salim Kidwai, and to the presiding the former presiding officer, David Melding, for ensuring that Remembering Srebrenica as a charity exists in Wales. I want to say thank you again to the presiding officer, to the Minister, for all your support for ensuring that we commemorate. And I hope that Wales will continue to commemorate each year, because the lessons of Srebrenica has never been far more important than now. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you very much, Waka. I would now like to explain about the work that the board have been doing in Wales. One of our 3 main charity remits in Wales is to learn from the lessons of Srebrenica. And with that, we wanted to include Srebrenica in the Welsh curriculum in some way. And we're grateful to Kirsty Williams, who championed our vision when she was Minister for Education in supporting Remembering Srebrenica Wales in our submission to put forward our education resources to the Welsh Baccalaureate. An accolade that we are grateful for her input for during the theme launch in February of this year. We look forward to proving that this support was justified by showing the results of our recent Youth Ambassador programme that we launched in March of 2021, whereby we're piloting the programme in Welsh universities with Welsh students, and that will be rolled out to colleges and schools in Wales in the next academic year. The second of our three main remits as a board is to encourage people to pledge, to take action now, and to build stronger and more cohesive communities in Wales. One way that we've been doing that is by putting on community engagement projects, but also by taking people on delegation to Bosnia to see what really happened and to meet survivors. We're proud in Wales to have taken a number of very successful delegations to Bosnia, and we look forward to facilitating more as and when COVID restrictions allow. And the third of our remits is to remember, and we ask Wales to do this through our commemoration events such as this one. We're grateful to the Senedd Commission and to the Welsh Government for supporting this event, as our in-person Senedd event that we had planned last year for the 25th anniversary could not take place due to COVID regulations. As a result, last year, the Welsh Board had to think of an alternative event that would suitably mark the 25th anniversary. We did this by bringing together Bosnia and Wales and performing the piece White Flower that was composed by a survivor of the Siege of Sarajevo, who was also a professional musician in the Sarajevo National Theatre. The lyrics to the song that Elvir Solak composed describes the soul of a victim, describing his mother's heartache and depicting the infamous white flower that has become the symbol of the Srebrenica genocide and indeed the emblem of our charity. The Sarajevo National Theatre and the Sarajevo Philharmonic Orchestra joined forces with the Cardiff Ardwin singers and musicians of Wales to create a song of remembrance to show Bosnia that Wales was still remembering them, even during the COVID pandemic that affected the whole world. We were proud to bring together 140 volunteers to create this masterpiece, which was shown across the world, and we will be showcasing it this evening in an event with the prestigious Llangollen Eisteddfod and the Academy Senedd Cymru, which is the Wales Peace Institute. As a direct result of this, the board were approached by a number of Bosnian people in Wales who heard the piece, and we have most recently created the Friends of Bosnia in Wales network, where we are now bringing together people who have rebuilt their lives in Wales, and we would like to create a home from home for them. We're also very grateful for the support that we have received across Wales from those individuals, organisations and local authorities who remember by creating their own commemoration events or community cohesion initiatives throughout Srebrenica Memorial Week. Please just look at our social media just to see how much engagement we've already had on just the second day of this year's Srebrenica Memorial Week in Wales. In order to give a little context, I will now just ask Dr. Azmi to explain about the 2021 Rebuilding Lives theme and what's next for Remembering Srebrenica following on from the 25th anniversary.
Thank you, Abby. This year's theme is Rebuilding Lives, and the theme aims to honour the 2 million people that were displaced, as well as those people who were murdered. We each year at Remembering Srebrenica choose a theme that reflects an aspect of the genocide that must be commemorated, but also speaks to communities here in the UK. We are going through a pandemic. There are so many people who have lost their loved ones. We have people in communities who have lost jobs, perhaps, who are suffering, and we are all looking to rebuild our lives. So albeit in different ways, we will be rebuilding our communities, rebuilding our lives, which is going to be so important. But also we have to be very vigilant, because in economic downturn and during challenges such as these, you have groups and individuals and organizations that want to exploit for their own benefit. So there will be people who will exploit communities and who will sow divisions, and we need to ensure that we are vigilant as we begin to rebuild our communities and rebuild our lives. The lessons from those people who survived the genocide and ethnic cleansing in Bosnia and Herzegovina is very simple. That the 2 million people who were displaced, the 10,000 who came to the United Kingdom, the many thousands who went to other parts of Europe and also to America and Canada, they have rebuilt their lives without promoting hatred. The survivors, the mothers who live in Srebrenica, who have returned, they have not called for revenge. There hasn't been a single act of revenge against the Serbs who carried out the genocide. They haven't called for hatred. They haven't promoted hatred. They're not teaching their future generation to hate the Serbs. And that is remarkable considering what they went through. And we need to ensure that we learn the lessons that the survivors are really are showing to us in the way they have rebuilt their lives. The survivors and the communities and their children are now flourishing, but it is by not calling for hatred, it is looking for justice. And we need to learn and instill those lessons from us to give us the strength to be able to rebuild our communities. So we pay tribute to all the survivors, to all the victims, and the dignity of survivors in the way they have rebuilt their lives.
Thank you. And just before I move on to the Q&A part, I'd just like to close this section by letting people know how they can get involved and to support the charity. As with any cause, we ask people to raise awareness of our work, and this can be done by signposting people to our website or our social media pages in the first instance, but also by partnering with us with community cohesion projects or asking for educational speeches or resources. We would like to be able to take more people on the Lessons from Srebrenica delegations, as Waka has mentioned, and crucially, and especially in Srebrenica Memorial Week, we simply ask people to remember. By taking part in events such as this, we're grateful to each and every person who has taken part in today's event and also in all of the other events across Srebrenica Memorial Week. And we just ask, please keep remembering so that we can learn from the past. I'm now going to move on to the Q&A section, and I would welcome this to be a discussion. So please, for all panel members, please feel free to step in after the initial answer has been given so we can make it an inclusive conversation. So Llywodraeth, can I start with you? Can you tell us why you, on behalf of the Senedd Commission, feel it is important to support Remembering Srebrenica Wales?
Well, I think it's particularly important this year because we were unable to do so last year in an in-person capacity. And therefore, I think it feels right for me as the Llywydd for this to be the first hybrid event that we've held and for it to be for this purpose. Of course, as has been mentioned already, David Melding has been a leading member both of this Senedd and of the Cofio Srebrenica, Remembering Srebrenica, and the work that's been accomplished so far in establishing this work in Wales. And I understand that David Melding is in the Zoom audience for today, and I just want to recognise the work that you've done thus far. I'm sure your work will continue, but to give the commitment to both David and to the committees here in Wales and in the UK, that the Senedd sees as its role, a continuing role, to provide a platform for remembering Srebrenica, but also for ensuring that the debate around the lessons that need to be learned from Srebrenica are heard clearly. Just quickly from me, for those of you who are on Zoom, you won't be hearing the backdrop of sound that we hear in the Senedd at the moment, which is the sound of children enjoying themselves in a fair that's happening here in Cardiff Bay. And we can hear the children enjoying themselves. And it's so important to hear children getting together and having a good time again. But we were reminded, of course, of the need for children not just to have a good time, but to be hearing of Srebrenica in the work that they learn in school, and to make sure that our children are learning the lessons of Srebrenica, knowing that it happened on the continent of Europe after the Second World War, which they learn much of in our schools and in our curriculum, but that they also know that we didn't properly learn the lessons of the Second World War, and that we need to continue to learn lessons, and our children can lead us on that.
Lovely, thank you. And we are very grateful for your continued support. Thank you. Minister, if I may, in your capacity as having responsibility for equality and human rights issues in Wales, can you tell us why remembering about previous human rights violations is so important for our future?
Well, so important for our future, and just the video, the sharing today, and listening as well to the survivors. And you know, I've been appointed Minister for Social Justice. This couldn't be more important for me today, remembering Srebrenica and rebuilding lives, but also recognizing the fact that unless we learn from past atrocities, the fact that we have, as the Llywodraeth has said, it's not that long ago, is it, in our lifetimes, that we have to see and witness, and we must learn and remember. So as Minister for Social Justice, of course, this is crucial in terms of human rights, strengthening equality, diversity, inclusion, and the kind of, and Dr. Hasmi, you said it so well in terms of why that brought you into this. And can I also thank you, Abby, for leading the way from civic society, but also with Professor Dr. Salim Kidwai, of course, chair of the Muslim Council for Wales for many years, where we also do in Wales look to the ways in which we come together with our Faith Communities Forum. It's learning those lessons, and then, as we've said, ensuring that we listen, we just remember the horror, we listen to the survivors, but actually we reflect, what does this mean for us here in Wales today in terms of our powers and responsibilities?
Yes, and thank you again for your support actually with the Faith Communities Forum as well, because you've given us a voice to be able to speak at those events as well. So I'm very grateful. Thank you. When talking about sensitive subject matters such as racism, hatred and extremism, how important is the language used in the political setting?
Well, it's hugely important. If our politicians and our political leaders cannot use the right language, cannot lead by example, then they are letting down the people who have elected them to serve in public office. And therefore, it's very important that the language that's used in the Senedd behind me, but more importantly, how that is reflected more widely in society, is tolerant and does not promote or allow hate to be spread within our communities. And I was struck by the point that you made in your final contribution, where you pointed to the fact that the mothers and survivors and women of Srebrenica are not promoting hate or seeking hateful vengeance on those who inflicted the genocide. And if they do not promote hate after everything that they have been through, how on earth can anyone else in any other society think that promoting hate is the right thing to do? So we should learn, all of us, politicians and all members of society, learn from the feelings and the strength of purpose of the women of Srebrenica.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Minister, in your role with working with the Future Generations Commissioner, the Older People's Commissioner and the Children's Commissioner for Wales, how do you think we can inform people of Wales more about the Srebrenica genocide beyond the work that we're already doing with the Welsh Baccalaureate and our community learning initiatives?
Well, the Wellbeing of Future Generations pioneering legislation of Wales really, I think, sets the scene for what we believe in. And, of course, this is important to say, this was passed by the Senedd. It's a cross-party endorsement of the ways in which we can use those independent commissioners, not just the Wellbeing of Future Generations Commissioner, but also Older People's Commissioner, Children's Commissioner, who remind us and ensure that those voices are heard. But I think particularly, I would say, in terms of young people and the future generations. And you've mentioned, Abby, not just the work in terms of the Welsh Baccalaureate, but also these youth ambassadors. They're the ones who are going to also educate us, because you're ensuring that they have got a powerful role to play. And I think for the Wellbeing of Future Generations Commissioner, she also has a commitment to a duty in terms of sustainable development. And we must look at this from the UN goals on sustainable development. Our new curriculum is actually going to enable our young people not just to be ambitious, creative, healthy individuals, but also to be informed, ethical citizens, not just of Wales, but of the world. And so this is, to be able to ensure that our commissioners can take this forward is very important as part of my responsibility as Minister in the Welsh Government.
Thank you, thank you. Waka, we've had a pre-submitted question through. The question is, how does the Srebrenica genocide differ from other genocides?
That's a really good question, thank you. How does it differ? Of course, there are other genocides that have taken place in the world. Firstly, because Srebrenica is the only genocide where the town was declared a safe UN area, and yet genocide took place. So when we say that a genocide is happening under international watch, I mean, this was literally international watch, where the UN were there in Srebrenica, and the people were handed over to Mladic when he entered, where boys and men were separated, and even the fuel for the coaches was provided by the UN, so that those men and young people, children, who are male children, were taken away, separated from women to be murdered, and women taken away to be raped. That's one. The second thing is that this is the recent genocide in Europe, where two faith groups have been murdered. One, the Jews, the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust, and the next were the Muslims murdered. And the third is that this is the only genocide where forensic has been used, and Abby is a leader in forensic. She's a lead scientist, forensic scientist. That when the bodies were taken, when people are murdered, they're thrown in mass graves. And when Madeleine Albright went public and said, "We know what you've done," the Serbs the authorities got very worried, and they then months later took diggers and trucks, and at night time, and this is all caught by the Americans on satellite, they dug those mass graves, and they basically took them to different parts of the country and dug other secondary graves and buried them then. Then months later, they thought that even the secondary graves were too big and they'll be caught for their crimes. And then they took trucks and diggers again, they dug those secondary graves and put them into tertiary graves. So through forensics, what you find, and this is the amazing work the International Commission on Missing Persons has done, is looking for whose body this is. So you find the leg in one place and the hand of the same person 60 miles away. Or, and this is the jigsaw where using forensic science has been put, put in place, that those bones are put together, and then mothers find out, this is my son, or this is my, this is my husband. So this is the only genocide, the first genocide that where forensic scientists have been involved to prove that this was a genocide.
Thank you. Thank you all for your answers. I'm mindful that we have one last swift element to this event. And so I, with respect, will bring this element to a close. And I will now hand back to the Llywodraeth, who will conclude the event and explain the final element.
Thank you. Diolch yn fawr, Abby.
Thank you very much, Abby, and thank you all for your work this afternoon.
This afternoon, and thank you as well to Dr. Azim and to the Minister Jane Hutt for contributions and for joining us here in the Senedd, and thank you to all of you who are watching this live or will watch it later, as we all mark and remember Srebrenica. And now we will hold a minute silence, munud o dawelwch I ni gyd gofio am
a minute of silence for all of us to remember Srebrenica.